Hey guys, what's going on? It's Jordan. So I kind of asked some people on Instagram, and a lot of people were interested in a video of homemade wine making or homemade mead making. So this video is for you guys.
Take off.
So I do like home brewing or home wine making, home mead making, even home brewing beer. So I kind of stick to wine just because it's a little easier, or mead. You don't really have to mill grains and steep grains and all that stuff. So the basics of this is you can use regular grape juice. Yes, it works. You can use honey if you like mead. You'll need some sugar. Not for the mead though, just for the wine. Sugar for the wine. You don't need any sugar for honey. And some other basic stuff. So most people probably don't have a food grade 2-gallon bucket laying around their house, although they're easily available to get at a local homebrew shop, or you can order them. They're like maybe $5 or $10 a piece. Another good option too is you can get these 1-gallon jugs. Most of them, I think a lot of apple juice makers use these. So you should be able to find these at the store for a couple of bucks with apple juice in it, and then you can make your own cider. Same thing. So just a quick basis, if you are using these 1-gallon jugs, the way to do that is when you fill your jug up, you want to leave at least up into the shoulder. So basically this portion right here you want to leave empty with air. So what will happen is while the yeast is eating the sugar, CO2 will escape. And so if you don't have enough headspace, what's going to happen is it could be a possibility that the fermenting beverage inside of this will bubble out over the top, and then you'll have a spill and a mess and everything all over the place. I like to use a 2-gallon food grade bucket. Like I said, they're pretty easy to find if you have a local homebrew shop. If not, you can order them online. This way, if you are doing 1 gallons, or if you have a little bit of extra, you don't have to really kind of mess with that. But if you need to use it and you're just getting started out, you can use a 1-gallon jug. Just remember to leave enough headspace. Some other things that you probably will need, which you can use in a pinch, if you don't have brewing yeast or winemaking yeast, you can actually use bread yeast. And yes, bread yeast will ferment. It will ferment up to about 13% alcohol. Another thing too is you'll need nutrients for the yeast to eat. So the yeast eats sugar, and in that process you need to keep continuing to feed the yeast, because what will happen is yeast, as they eat sugar, will die. So the more food you give the yeast, the healthier and the longer that they stick around. I have some home brewing nutrients. You can actually use raisins. I know it sounds crazy, but if you pick up a small little package of raisins from the store, you can throw about 15 or 20 of them into your must, which is what homebrewers consider to be the beginning product of your wine, is a must. You can use raisins, and yes, they do work. They are a very nutrient-rich source of nutrients for yeast. Another thing too is you'll need to get an airlock. So if you're using an airlock, this basically sits in here. It releases the CO2 out of the wine or the beer, basically keeping in all the good stuff and letting out all the nasty stuff, and also keeping nasty stuff out of your fermenting vessel. This is a carboy bung. If you don't have a 2-gallon food grade bucket, you would use that in your 1-gallon jug. The bung goes in here along with your airlock. Like I said, leave enough space here, headspace, and then you should be good to go for that. Now, if you don't have a homebrew store, or if you can't find any airlocks, you can use a balloon. So with a balloon, what will happen is the balloon will expand and contract, but mostly stay inflated during the entire time of fermentation. When the yeast is done fermenting, probably at the end of about a month, you'll see that the balloon will basically just flop over. Then you know that your wine or beer is done fermenting. So most people probably don't have a hydrometer or a beaker. Basically what the hydrometer does is it measures the amount of sugar in your must, and then from that you do a little bit of math, or you can use an app and it will give you your final results for alcoholic content. So that's basically about it. Alright, so today we're going to be making a white wine. I am using 100% white grape juice. I got this at the store. I actually got this at Winn-Dixie. They were 2 for $6, and some sugar. So with that being said, what you'll do is you'll take one of these and you'll set it aside. You'll take another one of these. You could probably use about half, but what you'll need to do is you'll need to basically take 2.5 cups of white sugar, and you'll need to take about half a gallon of grape juice, or if you're using any sort of other juice, I mean, you can use cranberry juice, you can use red grape juice if you like red wines. The list goes on. I mean, you could probably make a wine out of pretty much almost any juice. Orange juice, maybe. I don't know if I would do that. You could use pineapple juice, cranberry juice, blueberry, raspberry, whatever. Same thing applies. So there's not enough sugar in this to fully ferment into a wine, so that's why you'll need extra sugar on top of that. So you'll take a pot, you'll add your 2.5 cups of sugar, you'll add some of this, stir it together, make sure that the sugar is all dissolved. You will then put it inside of this to ferment. So you'll need to also clean everything. I know most people probably won't have sanitizing solution. This stuff you can also order online or get at a local homebrew shop. From what I understand, you don't really want to use bleach. I guess if you needed to use it in a pinch, you would probably want to use very sparingly, just enough to sanitize your bucket. And then if you're using that by any means, make sure that you thoroughly rinse your bucket or your carboy, because you don't want any of the bleach inside of your beverage, you know. So yeah, let's get started. Alright, so at this point what we're going to do is we're going to wash our bucket or our carboy. Basically, I like to do this. I clean everything with some hot soapy water first, and then I sanitize everything. And basically, that just ensures that there's no nasties on here that are going to foul your weed. Yeah, make sure you wash your weed too. Basically, washing everything, and then we're going to add some sanitizer just to make sure that there's no nasties on here. So this way nothing infects your wine or your mead or your beer. Now for a 1 gallon batch, if you're using Star San, I use about 1/4 ounce. That's plenty enough. It's probably actually too much, but I like to make sure that my shit is sanitized and is not going to be infected. So this way I get a nice end result. Everything's clean, sanitary. So make sure you clean everything. So what I like to do is I like to take my airlock, and I like to take my hydrometer and my flask. What I do with the flask is I try to get the sanitizing solution inside of here. sanitize this, because what's going to happen is when we're all done adding all of everything, we're going to take a hydrometer reading, and that will be our basis. Should be good. Doesn't need to be entirely full, just enough. You can then take your hydrometer and put it in there. And remember, if you touch anything after you have washed and sanitized your hands, make sure that you sanitize your hands again. This is a no-rinse sanitizer, and it acts fairly well, pretty instantly. As far as I know, it's food grade safe. I haven't had any problems with it. Boom. Alright. If you're using a 1 gallon glass jug, same thing. You would go through here. I'm not using this today, but you would go through here. You would do the same thing. Wash it inside and out with hot soapy water. Then you would take your sanitizer. You would add your sanitizer into that. Let it sit. I like to let it sit for a couple of minutes. I know some people will let it sit for less time, and some people will set it for longer. I basically just fill this up with sanitizer after I've done washed it. Fill it up with sanitizer, let it sit for when I'm ready to use it, and then I will dump the sanitizer out. 2.5 cups of plain white sugar. I like to use the half cup measuring cup just because it's easier. So you got 1 cup. 2 cups. Whatever that was. 2.5. Alright, so basically I wasn't getting full 2 half cups, so I'm just going to add some extra in there just to make sure. If you're a stickler for measurements and you're using a half cup measuring cup, you know, make sure it's level. Bam. Alright, so now we're going to take our white grape juice, or red grape juice, or pineapple juice, or cranberry juice, raspberry, blueberry, whatever kind of juice you're using. I'm going to basically put that in there. It should be plenty. Turn that on, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to dissolve our white table sugar until there's nothing left in here. We will then add this mixture into our carboy or our bucket. Like I said, if you're using a carboy, so what you get from this will probably come up to about here. You'll add the rest of this in, and then you'll top it off up to about the shoulder, maybe around this, with the rest of your grape juice. Put this in a safe place, because eventually what will happen is you'll need to re-top off. So once you have fermented everything in here and it's done fermenting, you will then transfer the contents in here to another clean one of these, so you'll need at least 2 of them. Once that's transferred, you'll have sediment at the bottom. You want to leave that in there. You want to try not to get any of that into your new brew, because that's basically yeast and dead yeast cells. And so yeah, when you transfer from one carboy or a bucket to a carboy, you want to try and leave all the sediment in the bottom. If you're transferring from carboy to carboy, when you're done transferring, you'll finish and top off with more grape juice to get it to the desired amount. The mixture is cool. You can use a little meat thermometer. So you take your meat thermometer, Take your sanitizer, swash it around in the sanitizer, make sure that that thing's sanitized and nothing's gonna, no bacteria or anything. Take your temperature. So right now we're at about 100 degrees on our mixture. You want to make sure that it's at least at or below 90 degrees, if not cooler than that. For bread yeast, I want to say I think their optimal temperature is probably around 75 or 80. I believe with actual brewing or wine yeast, it's a little bit higher than that. This one is between 95 and 99 degrees. So at that point, what you'll do is you'll take your mixture, you'll take your extra juice that you have left, and you'll put them in your bucket. You'll mix everything together. Take a spoon, sanitize the spoon, put it away until you're ready to use it. Because what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to aerate the mixture to get air into it, so this way the yeast has something to work off of, along with your sugar. Another thing to remember too, if you want to, which will probably help speed up the process of the brewing process or the fermenting process, you can take a small cup. If you have a smaller cup, like maybe a 4-ounce or an 8-ounce cup or whatever, you can take a little bit of the either just regular juice, put it in that. Alright, so what I just added to that was diammonium sulfate and some Fermaid K, so basically fermenting nutrients and nitrogen to help the yeast. So this is the pre-dissolved mixture of the yeast, the nutrients, and some other stuff. So we're basically just waiting for the yeast to react and start bubbling, and then we can go ahead and pitch the yeast. You can take your yeast. I use this whole packet. I probably actually don't need to, but I'm not brewing multiple batches, so I just dump this whole thing. This is a 5-gram package. I think for regular bread yeast, it's like a tablespoon, give or take, maybe a teaspoon. I'd probably go tablespoon just to be on the safe side, just so this way you have extra yeast if they're not all active. So at that point, what you can do is you can take a little bit, like I said, you can take a cup, you can put the yeast in it and basically activate the yeast. Once the yeast is activated, you can then pour it into your mixture. You can take your bubbler or your airlock, you can set it into your jug or your bucket and set the jug or the bucket in a nice, cool, dry, dark area. You don't want to put this near a window. You don't want to put it somewhere hot, like in your... you don't want to put this anywhere hot, like in your laundry room or anything like that. You want to have a nice, cool, an extra closet that you don't use in a bathroom or something. And then that's basically it. If you want to get a little bit more advanced, what you should do is you should keep some of your sanitizing solution every day for 7 days. So basically 2 times a day in a week. You'll take a sanitized spoon and you'll stir your mixture. Basically what that's doing is it's releasing any extra CO2 that is in the wine that is being produced. Because at the end, what will happen is you'll still have a lot of CO2 left in this, and you want to try to dissipate as much of that as possible during the first initial week of the brewing process. That's when the yeast is still killing the bacteria and any other eating sugars and doing all that stuff. Keeping a sanitized spoon and then stirring it 2 days or 2 times every day is going to help reduce the CO2 at the end of the cycle. So this way when you go to bottle your wine or whatever, your bottles aren't exploding on you. That's something to keep in mind. You want to try and get as much CO2 out of the wine as possible. With beer, that's a different story because people obviously like carbonated beer. So take that into account. But for wines and meads, you want to extract as much CO2 as possible during the first week. And then as you go through and you're transferring it into a new vessel after the first month, basically when you're transferring it, the transfer process will also release some of the CO2 that is captured into the wine. So keep that in mind too. So yeah, we'll come back in a month and we'll see how this is doing, and we'll go from there. I'll catch you guys in a month. Peace.